Okay, so I'm going to show how to disassemble a Dell XPS 159530. So this laptop is having a battery issue, which caused also a trackpad issue, and then it also the keyboard was also having an issue. So to disassemble it, you're going to need a PH1 and a T5. I use a J1, but you can use a PH1. So the T5 is only used for the outer screws here. So you're going to want to remove all 10. So just remove those. Ties the tip. Okay. I think I need to use the other side of the magnet. Alright. Alright, once you got all 10 of those T5 screws out, you want to get your Phillips screwdriver. Remove the 2 under this cap. Keep the screws in order because they can be different sizes and you don't want to get them all mixed up. Once you get that out, you can open this up. Sometimes it might be clipped in place, so you might want to use your nails or a pry tool. So just go around the edges, go around the back, and once you get that, you can get this up. This side, this front came up easier, and then the back you can kind of wiggle it out. So there you go. So now as you can see, so we got the battery. The problem with this battery is it started bulging out, which caused it to push onto the back of the trackpad. So we're going to remove usually it's always best to remove the battery first. If you have a externally removable battery, just do that first before you start doing anything else. Just remove these screws. There's one up in this corner, and then there's 3 along the bottom. So remove those. Remember to keep the screws in order so you don't get them all mixed up. Okay. Once you do that, pull this connector out. There's a little bit of a lip on the back of the connector. So you can see here. Usually I'll use my nail and I'll just pull this out like this, wiggle it. Once you get it out a little bit, you can lift the battery up, and then pull the rest of it out. Don't pull too much force because you could damage the cable here. Okay, once you got that, then you can see the hard drives here. Usually once you remove the battery, it's a good idea to hold the power button just to make sure to drain any power out of the computer. So open it up, hold the power button for a few seconds. Once you do that, you can see the hard drive here. Remove the hard drive. So there's 4 Phillips screws, one here, one here, one here, and one here. Oh, this screw is a little tough. Once you got those 4, get this blue tab for the connector and pull straight up. If the tab is broken, sometimes it breaks off, what you can do is use a pry tool or your fingernail and then just kind of lift on one side and then this will come up. But yeah, usually you can just pull the connector straight up. Just be careful if you use a pry tool because it's hard to gauge how much force you're using. Just pry it up lightly. Once you do that, set the hard drive aside. the RAM is here. You don't need to remove it, but you can if you want. If you want to upgrade it, you just pull these two things to the side like this, and it'll pop up, and then you can pull this out. To put it back, you basically just put it back in at an angle, like that, the same way it came out, and then push it down. So the RAM I'm going to leave there since it doesn't need to be removed. Then there's this connector. You pull up, pry up from the bottom like this, and pry up from the bottom like this on both sides. Set that aside. This one, the wireless card is up here. I don't need to remove that, but I'll show you how to remove that just in case. So there's one screw holding it in place. And then that has this metal plate. Make sure you keep it in the right way, so that way you know which way to put it back. I like to keep the screw with it, so just like that. So once you do that, you can move the card, you can lift it up a little and then wiggle it out. If you need to replace the card to remove the connector, let me see if I can show you. So to remove the connector, just like every other wireless card, what you want to do is pull on the back of the connectors and it'll pop out, and then you just push the connector back on to put it back. So just make sure you have it completely over the circle connector, and then you just push it down. It's kind of hard to do it with this angle, but yeah. Well, I'll put it back afterwards. And then you got the CMOS battery here. The cable goes underneath, so you'll have to remove all this. You have to remove all of these other pieces, the fan and the board. So you'll want to remove all of that to be able to get to to remove the CMOS battery. The connector's here and the cable goes around. So all of these actually I don't need to remove, so I'm going to leave this side in place. But basically there's one screw here, and one screw here. And then you also have to remove the SSD here. And then there's also the fan connector underneath this flap. So you need to remove that. And then there's this connector, I believe this is for the webcam. And then there's the connector here for the touchscreen, and then the connector here for the DC jack charging port, and then this connector is for the LCD. Then you got the connector here. I'm not sure what that's for, but it goes to the touchpad, and then there's another cable that goes to the touchpad here. So probably one is for the button, and then the other is for the touch sensor. Then you got the keyboard connector and the backlight connector for the keyboard. So let me put this piece back. There we go. All right. So this one, I'm going to have to replace the keyboard. So first what you want to do, there's a bunch of screws. So there's one holding the fan in right here. And then there's one holding this SSD in. So once you remove the SSD screw, the SSD will pop up at an angle. You just wiggle it out. And to put it back, same thing as the RAM. Just put it at an angle, push it down, and then put the screw in. So we'll set that aside. Then there's one screw for the motherboard here. There's another screw all the way over here. Then you got another screw holding this fan here. So make sure keep the screws in order. And then you got another screw here holding the board. And then you got one more screw right under this flap here that's covering it up. Let's see, here we go. Oh yeah, then there's 2 screws up in these corners. They're silver and they actually stay in place, so you don't need to remove them. You just unscrew it until you hear it clicking. Then remove these connectors. This one, there's a little flap here. Let me see if I can show you. So to remove these, all you do is flip it up like this. Once you do that, you can lift this cable. It has a little part that gets caught on the plastic here, so make sure you kind of lift it up a bit and then wiggle it out. Then there's another one here. Flip it up, same thing. This one doesn't have the things that keep it in place, so just pull it out. Then the keyboard has some tape over it. Just flip this up as well. It also has the tab, so make sure you lift it up a bit and then pull it back. Then you got the other connector here. There you go. Flip that up as well. Same thing. This one doesn't have the tabs, so you just pull it out. This one might be a little tough to pull out, so if you can get something thin underneath this purple plastic piece, and then you can just grip on that and pull it. So make sure not to pull too hard. This is held in place with some adhesive, so you don't want to like pull it and then bend the cable too much or you can damage it. Alright, so once you get all those screws out, then you can actually lift this. Actually, there's a connector here for the speaker that runs all the way down to the speakers here. So make sure you disconnect that. And then first there's these 2 fans. You can actually remove the fans first, but you'll have to remove the connector up here. This is for the DC charging jack again. So again, there's like a lip on this connector, so you just wiggle it and pull it out like that. And then for the connector here for the touchscreen, there's a little piece of tape. So let me see if I can show that. So there's a little piece of tape holding it. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a little piece of tape holding this. So you peel this tape and then you can kind of pull this out with your nail or a plastic pry tool. Okay. Then for the fan, actually disconnect the LCD connector. So the LCD connector is the same as the hard drive one. You just pull straight up on this, or you can use your nail on a corner if you broke the plastic for some reason. Alright, once you get that up and out of the way, now you can see, let's see here, the fan connector is actually right here. So use your nails, the corners stick out a little bit, and just wiggle it, and it'll come out like that. There's an adhesive underneath the fan, so you'll kind of have to pull a little hard. When I first opened it, I actually lifted the board and then used something underneath to kind of pull up on the fan. But the fan will come out if you just pull on it kind of hard. So the adhesive is like right here. So same thing with the other fan. There's also an adhesive on there. Do the same thing. Just disconnect it. The connector is underneath this flap here. So as you can see, same thing. You can just remove it by using your nails and pushing the corners like that. And then make sure when you take the fan out that it guides under this, doesn't get caught on this wire, or you might break that wire. You don't need to remove this one to replace the keyboard. So unless you need to replace these 2 USB ports and the wireless circuit board, then you don't really need to take this stuff out. Alright, so just lift up on the fan. It'll be held in place with an adhesive in the corner, on this corner right here, just like the other one. So don't be afraid to pull on it, it'll come out. There's also a little notch here, so when you put the fan back, make sure, because it's underneath this cable, that you get it onto that little part that sticks up. It'll go into this hole here. Okay. So once you got all these connectors out, and then you got the 2 fans out, then you can lift up the motherboard. All right, and then you just take it out like that. So as you can see, the GPU is under here, it's all soldered in place. The CPU is in here, it's soldered in place, so you can't upgrade it. But you could always upgrade this. This is a not a M.2, sorry, it's a M SATA SSD. It looks like this. And then the other one is just a regular hard drive. You might need a thinner one. So this is a slim hard drive. I don't know if this, I think this is probably like a 7mm hard drive. So you wouldn't be able to use like the 9.5mm ones that normally you would buy in the store. So if you were to replace this hard drive, make sure to get one of those. You could also replace it with an SSD, because SSDs are pretty much all 7mm now. There are a few that are thicker if you were to find like a used old one, but pretty much all the current ones are 7mm. And then, yeah, this is the back of the motherboard. The power button's here, so if for some reason your power button's broken, I don't think there's going to be an easy way for anyone to solder this, but if they wanted to try, you can probably replace that if you break the power button for some reason. Yeah, otherwise you'd have to replace the whole board. Then you see all the ports. Okay, so set that aside. Changing the keyboard on this thing is kind of a pain because it has a lot of screws. Not as many as a Mac keyboard, but it does have a lot. You can actually see this one's kind of nice. They put some letters here to show you. If you buy a replacement keyboard and it doesn't come with a built-in backlight, then you're going to have to remove the plastic. The replacement keyboard backlight that I got, it was actually kind of torn up, so I took this off. I'm not going to use it. And actually, you can peel off this as well if your other keyboard comes with the extra layer. So, let's see here. So what I did on this keyboard, let's see here. I'm going to have to actually replace it because I haven't done it yet. But I got like a needle and I lift it up underneath here. And then just carefully peel this up. So if you damage this, then your backlight's not going to work. But you can also buy like a replacement backlight plastic thing like this. So if anything, worst case is you have to replace this piece. So lift this up. It'll get caught on these pieces here on both sides, so just make sure when you lift it that you get those out of the way. And then you only need to lift it up like that. You don't need to remove it completely so that you can get to all the screws. So I didn't count how many screws, but actually for this I forgot to mention you'll need a smaller screwdriver because I don't think this will fit. Well, it does kind of fit, but don't use that because if you use that screwdriver, you're probably going to strip all the screws and they're going to get stuck. So my recommendation is to use a PH0 or J0 instead. Let me see if that one's correct fit. Yeah, so that fits well. So just make sure when you work on it that if you put the screwdriver in there and you twist it like trying to tighten it, the screwdriver shouldn't jump out. If it jumps out, then you're using the wrong size screwdriver, and you want to get a different one before you start trying to remove all of them. I've had several people try and remove them with the wrong screwdriver, and then I had to like basically use what is it, like a drill screwdriver bit removal tool, and pretty much the screws are useless after that. You can't put them back. So just make sure you use the right bits for that. Okay, so for the keyboard, one way you can kind of see, if you look at this, you can see where all the holes for the screws are. So as you can see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, if you turn it around, yeah, 5 on the top. Then you got 1 here. Then you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So you got 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. So it looks like 28 screws that we'll have to remove. So just go through this. Yeah, and I always like to keep the screws in order, even if they're the same size, just because sometimes it's machined out and then the screws will fit perfectly in that spot. So if you kind of try and put another screw there, it can kind of mess it up. Most people don't put them back exactly the same, but I find that's a good practice. Just better to do the little bit of extra work and make sure that it doesn't damage anything. So let's just see this. Okay, so again, just remove all the screws here. Let's see if I can zoom in a little bit. Just this. Okay. see a little bit better. Alright. Let's remove all these screws. Alright. Okay. It's difficult to see this, so let me see here. Alright, so got all those. Then you got one here. Here. Hey, guinea pig's going crazy. Oh, I can't see. Okay, so actually there isn't a screw here, it's just a raised dot. So less screws than I thought. Oh, that screw didn't come out. There we go. Alright, so I got all those. All those. This one's also just a raised dot, so don't worry about a screw there. I'm working on it from kind of far back, so it's kind of hard to see. Calm down, calm down. The guinea pig's going crazy. She's going crazy. Don't eat that. Okay, well, back to the repair. Alright, so just remember, go through all these screws. Should be easier for you because I'm doing this actually at arm's length. Usually I have it like less than a foot from me. Right now I have it like about 2 feet, maybe 3 feet from me, so it's kind of tougher. I'm not sure of a better way to record it, but for now that's what I'm doing. Alright. Alright, so there's another screw here. So it looks like actually these corner ones, the 4 corners, they're actually just little tabs, so there's no screws actually there. Alright. And one thing you might want to do whenever you get a replacement keyboard, if you can, this one I was able to plug in the keyboard and test it beforehand. So what I do is the keyboard's like this. So what you can do is you can take the bottom cover of the laptop off and then just flip it over like this, and then the connector, just make sure plug it in the same way. And then I'll actually test the keyboard with it plugged in like this and use it kind of upside down. If you do that, just make sure you don't damage this cable when you're doing it. Yeah. Okay. That helps with these complicated keyboard repairs, because if it ends up the keyboard's not working after you install everything, it's going to be a pain to have to take everything back apart and then either get a new keyboard or replace it. So again, so it's always nice to, if it's built in a way that you can, test it first. Alright, so we got the keyboard out. Here you go. Now you just grab the new keyboard. This one, it has this piece, so I'm going to make sure to peel it off like the other one, since this piece is actually here already. Alright. Let's see here. So this has this layer, and it has another layer. So make sure, just peel all those layers back off. Just like that. Alright. So this one, the plastic helps spread the light evenly across the keys. That's why they have this plastic and the other plastic piece. This one also helps reflect the light. So normally it'll be like this with the 2 layers, and then when you look at it, it'll be like that. So yeah, so that helps the light actually transfer through to the keyboard. Okay, so now you just put this back. Make sure these cables aren't going underneath the keyboard, because if you screw it in and those cables are under there, it's going to be a pain. You have to take it back out just to remove those. So make sure, get all the cables, make sure there's no cables, check around all the corners. Alright, then you just put all the screws back in. Okay, this one. Again, like in my other videos, I always like to turn the screw backwards a little bit just to make sure it goes into the hole properly, because if it goes in at a weird angle, then you can actually mess up the screw or even the machine screw holes, and then the screw won't hold in very well, or in the future if you need to replace it, it's pretty much not gonna work. Okay. So just put back in all the screws. Alright. Make sure not to lose the screws. Alright. Actually like working on the floor because there's less chance that if I were working on a desk and I dropped a screw, it'll fall and roll around on the floor and it'll be very difficult to find. So this helps with the height, that it doesn't fall as far and bounce all over the place. So, and then another thing, since you're working on electronics and they're sensitive to like static buildup and things like that, if you're working on carpet, you can get one of those wrist straps that kind of keep you grounded. But if you're just doing this like once or so, you probably, unless you want to go and buy one, you can just like touch some metal surface every time if you're like moving around a lot, or if you have to get up, just touch something metal to drain it, and that should be okay. Right. Also, when you screw it in, make sure that there's no like crumbs or something stuck under the keyboard, so you can make sure it like rests flat. Oh, oops, it's already in there. Okay. I don't know why this screw just kept spinning. I think this one, that whole screw hole is actually not holding well. Okay. Alright, so once you got all the screws back in, remember to switch back to the other screwdriver bit, otherwise you'll end up stripping out the other screws. So switch back to the J1 or PH1. Make sure you keep these connectors out of the way when you put this plastic back down, and then make sure to get the plastic back over these two posts here, like that. And then make sure to lift these out of the way. Make sure none of the other connectors are in the way as well. Alright. And then just push this back down. Okay. You want to make sure this is flat. This is a little wrinkled. The main ones you want to make sure are flat are the ones around the fan. So this is probably okay. You can test it before anything, but this should be okay. Okay, once you got all of that in place, flip it over, check the keyboard keys before you put everything back together. Just make sure nothing feels like it's stuck. Okay, feels good. Close it back up. This one, the speaker's falling out. So actually, if you need to replace the speakers, you can remove these as well. There are little rubber pieces here. Don't lose those, because if you lose them, then your speaker is just going to wobble around in the case. That's supposed to make it so it doesn't make like rumbling sounds when it vibrates too loudly. So there you go. So make sure those are in, and then you just reverse the process. Grab the motherboard again. Make sure these connectors are on top of the board when you put it back, and all of these connectors as well. So I like to start actually with this corner because it has this little raised part here. Once you get that, make sure to keep these connectors out of the way. Alright. Make sure none of the connectors are underneath. There you go. So now that you got the motherboard back in, put the screws. Let's see. Actually, you can put all the pieces first and then put the screws. So again, this connector goes underneath this cable. So just make sure, lift it up a little bit, get the connector under there, and then plug it back in. Let's see, this one might be a little tough. Actually, to make it easier, you can just remove this connector. So there's some tape holding this in place. You just wiggle this and it'll come out like that. So again, put the fan, put the connector in place. Usually they'll mark it with a dot so you know which side face up. This one has a red dot on it. If it doesn't have the dot, just make sure when you put the connector in that the flat side is up, not the part with that shows the pins. Okay. Same thing with this side. Put the connector in. Make sure it clicks into place. And then again, there's a little hole here. Make sure that lines up with the thing that's sticking up on the case. So you can spin the fans. Make sure it's not hitting anything. Right. Once you got that, you can put this connector back in. This one's just like a plug, so you just reconnect that. You can use the tape if you can't like pull it that well to pull it back in, and then if you have nails, you can use that to pull the connector in all the way. Then just tuck this back underneath the fan. Right. And then same thing with this LCD connector. It actually gets tucked in under here, so make sure to tuck it back in. So this part goes under, this goes over, and then you just slide this back around. And this, just make sure it's lined up and then press down. You can make sure it's pressed in. When you lift on it, it should stay in there. And then just push it, make sure it's staying in. Okay. Now you got that. Put back in all the motherboard screws and the fan screws. So remember, put the SSD back first at an angle, and then press down. Yours might have 2 screws. I don't know if somebody opened this before, but there's only 1 screw here. Alright. Grab the other screws. Oops. Go. These 2 screw holes are from the bottom case, so make sure you don't put any screws there. Okay. One thing I forgot to mention, the trackpad I've already actually, like, the battery, what happened was it pulled this plastic away from the trackpad, so I actually just pushed it back together. The adhesive was kind of separating. But yeah, to remove the trackpad, there's 2 screws here, and then you don't need to remove this board here, but you remove this small, there's a small clip that flips up just like the rest of these, and then you can actually pull this away, and then this one, since it's already disconnected, you can take that out. Then you just lift it up, and this part, it will just slide out like that. So to put it back, you just basically slide it back under, and then push this back down and put the screws in. Alright, so once you got the screws for the board in, just one more. Once you got the screws for the board and the fan in, then just reconnect everything. Put the touch cable in before you put the DC jack cable, because it'll get in the way. Okay, there you go. Make sure everything's plugged in all the way. Be careful with the edges here of the cables, because you can actually damage the connectors or the wires, and if you damage the wires, it's not going to work. So if you pull the plug in, just make sure pull on the plastic, not on the cables. Okay, there you go. Open that. Make sure these little latches are flipped up, and then slide the cables back in. Let's see here. Yep, so make sure that's up. Slide the cable back in.